They dumped leftover food on him without knowing he owned the $800 million company. If you love stories like this, subscribe. The ballroom smelled like citrus polish and warm perfume. Chandeliers hung like constellations over a floor polished to a mirror shine, and every reflected light landed on 1,000 small certainties, silk folding over bone, cufflinks catching, heels tapping in a practiced rhythm. The Hale Quantum logo looped across the main screens in perfect vector rotations, blue, silver, a promise. Servers moved in synchronized arcs with silver trays. An orchestra played an easy, insinuating set. Guests leaned in toward each other, and those who mattered, circulating the currency of compliments and deal whispers. Jamal Rivers moved through that room like someone trying on a life that had not been made for him. His jacket fit, not poorly, but it fit without the calculated extravagance of those who could afford to announce themselves with their clothes. The fabric had been pressed clean, the shirt collar was neat. There was no ostentation about him, only a quiet insistence on being present. He carried himself with a modest gait, neither hurried nor slow, a man who had learned how to be visible without demanding the room bend. People saw him and did not see him. That absence was a small cruelty, the sort that is practiced in private for pleasure. A doorman offered the wrong kind of smile. A waiter mistimed his approach, as if Jamal were a fixture to be moved. At the periphery, a cluster of board members laughed, their heads bent toward each other, as if the joke was a fragile trophy to be passed. Vanessa Hale glided through the crowd like an orchestrator of decibel and taste. Her gown spoke in silk and threat. Her smile had the clinical chill of a frost that kills slowly. She found him by design, not by accident. There are social hunts that wear the colors of chance. Vanessa's eyes landed on Jamal and sharpened. She stepped closer, another predator in heels, and began to speak to him as if she were a servant she had mistaken the contours of. Her words were small knives wrapped in velvet. "Nice jacket," she said, loud enough for those around to hear, "for someone who should be clearing plates." Laughter, high and brittle, separated into the air like shards. Richard Hale watched with the practiced indifference of a man who had always been the center of reflexive attention. He had the posture of entitlement, relaxed, unconcerned, because the room belonged to him. His chuckle landed like permission, the snickers amplified. A guest pulled out a phone, as if the moment itself required capture. The room's attention rearranged itself toward the spectacle. The escalation was almost absurd in how small it began. A hand brushed Jamal's sleeve, dismissive, a hint of pushing. Someone replaced his water glass with a carafe meant for simpler hands. Comments about service and staff ricocheted. Each act alone might have been shrugged off. Collected, they formed a tightening band. Vanessa moved to the center of that ring, and her final gesture was performative cruelty. She lifted a napkin as if to brush non-existent crumbs from Jamal's lap. The movement was intimate with contempt. Then Richard stepped forward, glass in hand, his smile slow enough to be deliberate. Wine arced. It was a domestic gesture made monstrous by intent. Red hit the lapel with a living sound, fabric drinking color. The spill was wet and immediate, darkening the weave, drawing a gasp from somewhere beyond the chandeliers. Perfume and spilled wine mixed into a sudden, invasive bouquet. The orchestra's chords blurred into the murmur of the crowd. Phones were up before the echo of the liquid had settled, cameras hungry and exact. Jamal stood still. He could have spoken. He could have lifted a hand in protest. Instead, he reached for a small, tidy motion. He dabbed at the stain with the hem of a napkin offered by an embarrassed waiter, set his jaw, smoothed the fabric as best he could. The stain did not ask for words. His face did not unfurl into outrage. It flattened into composure. There was a soft sound, like a reception falling away. What followed was not silence, but a focused hum. People leaned toward their screens. Clips of the moment began to live a separate life, cropping and looping, the chair of the room's judgment sitting on endless replay. The scene had everything that travels fast: sharp contrast, a clear actor, a symbolic overthrow of social order. It had mischief on the surface and cruelty beneath. It had a man made small in front of 1,000 small witnesses. He left. Not with a dramatic flourish, but with a deliberate exit that felt disproportionate to the violence of being humiliated. He straightened his shoulders, tucked the napkin away, and walked out of the pool of light. As he passed the edge of the ballroom, the noise swallowed him differently. A foreign acoustic, raw and quick. The hush of people closing ranks. He moved down a corridor where the light softened, where the air smelled like the cool of a hallway and the memory of citrus polish faded. The elevator doors opened like a mouth to a quieter world. He rode down alone. Outside, the city's night pressed against him with a different vocabulary. Distant taxi horns, the shuffle of late staff leaving, the metallic scent of a parked car. His hand found his phone, and he dialed a number known to only a few. His voice, when it came over the line, was low and precise. It held no triumph. It held instructions. "Pull the offer," he said. "Lock the channels. Issue the statement. Terminated. Announce it now." Those were not threats. They were decisions, moved into action. They were the measured use of authority by someone who had not broadcast his power. The calls after were short, the responses clipped, the compliance immediate. Jamal gave no exultant monologue. He watched the street through the glass of a low-slung window as a cool wind threaded into the corridor. His hands were steady. Back inside the ballroom, the first ripple hit as a textual flicker on a phone screen, a terse message, an internal note, then the first public alert. A server's tablet lit up red. A projector stuttered and shifted from logo to a black screen with white letters. Statement. For a suspended moment, people thought it was a mistake, a staging flourish. Then another screen went dark. Guests reached into their pockets, and the room's chatter spilled toward panic. Who had the authority? What had happened? Phones multiplied the image of the spill, but now they looped in a different way. Clips that had been intended to mock now threaded themselves to the message that unstitched the current thread of the evening. Hale Quantum's private channel flashed an internal alert. The company's logo, once a presence on 1,000 devices, looked suddenly vulnerable as its corporate signals faltered into a public scramble. No one saw the mechanics. They saw the result. The screens around the room flicked to news tickers, to messaging boards, to a terse press release that said simply that negotiations were suspended and that the board had been informed. Investors called. Phones glowed with terse language. An assistant scrolled and then scrolled again, eyes widening as a cluster of direct messages arrived with phrases like "pull back" and "hold." Where there had been ease, there formed in its place a raw and telltale anxiety. Outside the ballroom, the clip of Jamal being humiliated had gone live across feeds. It moved with the speed that attention affords controversy. Edited versions for drama, slower motion for commentary, captioned takes pointing out the social cruelty. The shame that had been directed at Jamal ricocheted back in a new rhythm. Comments threaded moral judgment with corporate fallout. "How could they?" read one. "This is the company's leadership?" read another. The clip was now the axis around which opinion rotated. At the Hale family table, Vanessa's laughter had already curdled. Richard's composure showed cracks. His hand trembled slightly against the stem of his glass. He reached for the phone, the same device that had been used to broadcast another's humiliation, now returning to him like a boomerang. He watched the notifications pile up, each tone a small nail. A minute grew into 10. The main screen that had once displayed the logo now scrolled a formal line. Hale Quantum's negotiations with an undisclosed investor have been suspended. The word suspended fractured into a broadcast that meant money and projection had changed hands. The atmosphere shifted from social theater to the urgent business of damage control. Board members texted each other in the open, faces tight. A few guests filed away, their interest replaced by the practical business of avoiding contagion. The next morning, the world outside Jamal's modest house was a different kind of public. Headline thumbnails crowded a phone screen like concerned, pressing palms. High-profile deal collapses. Hale Quantum deal terminated after viral clip. Leadership under fire. The story had found a rhythm. Humiliating clip, decisive corporate action, and the swift pattern of belief and betrayal that social media loves to amplify. Richard and Vanessa appeared at Jamal's door like people who had been stripped of every carefully arranged defense. The driveway that had once been a route to social performance was now a corridor for apologies. Vanessa's hair had lost its practiced curl. Her voice had lost its performative edge. They stepped out of a black car that looked too new and too ashamed for anything to be staged. Their hands trembled in ways that had nothing to do with cold. Jamal opened the door, and the house smelled faintly of coffee and old wood, not of a life trying to prove anything. He did not invite them in. His posture at the threshold was neither mockery nor piety. It was a measured guardrail. They began immediately, the two of them overlapping pleas, a braided apology of regret and plea and explanation. "We were wrong. We didn't mean," Vanessa said. Richard interlaced words with a frantic cadence, half apology and half attempted bargain. They wanted reinstatement. They wanted the deal fixed, as if a single evening's humiliation could be rewound and smoothed into irrelevance. They wanted the alliances and valuations restored. They wanted the room to return the favor that had been given, erasure. Jamal listened. He did not speak at once. He let the words fill the doorframe, as if weighing them by the way they sat in air. When he finally spoke, it was not to dictate terms or to gloat about the cost inflicted. His voice was calm, direct, and contained the unusual force of someone who had been wronged and had chosen responsibility over reprisal. "You don't get to treat a stranger like less," he said. "Not because you can't be forgiven, you can. But forgiveness isn't a currency you spend to erase what was done. Respect is the baseline. It's what keeps all of us human. Actions have consequences." Their faces shifted as if trying on the shape of accountability. Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed. Richard reached for a phrase about pressure, about the nature of a room where people perform for each other. He offered excuses that, in the bright honesty of Jamal's small house, sounded thin. Jamal's answer was not a lecture. It was a boundary. "I won't reinstate the offer," he said. "I won't pretend there was no harm. What happened in that room had effects beyond your intention." He did not enumerate the mechanisms by which he had acted the night before. He did not boast about the corporate gears that had turned because of his word. He simply stated the consequence and let it stand on its own. There was justice in that simplicity because it carried both firmness and restraint. He had chosen to use his authority not to humiliate in return, but to refuse to align himself with people who made small cruelties their entertainment. Richard asked for mercy. Vanessa asked for a second chance. Jamal's answer was a refusal that smelled less like revenge and more like correction. He offered them nothing that would return things to how they had been. There was a cold arithmetic to that refusal, but nothing gleeful in it. After they had left, the door closed on the sound of their retreat and on the faint echo of what had been asked. Jamal remained at his window for a while, watching the street accept them back into its flow. The world outside was unchanged in its traffic and in the small movements of people, but the private economies of power had been remapped. In the weeks that followed, the Hale name appeared in different contexts. Op-eds and boardroom rumors, legal statements couched in careful language, sympathetic takes that tried to hold the complexity of the moment. The viral clip that had launched the cascade remained a hinge in the public imagination. Some saw it as a deserved fall, others as an example of swift corporate retribution. But for Jamal, the event resided differently. It was a boundary he had drawn, firm and no-nonsense, between how he expected to be treated and what he would tolerate in the world he helped shape. He returned to his days without bearing the trappings that people expected someone of his means might show. His comfort remained in choices that were modest and intentional. He continued to move through different rooms without demanding attention. His decisions were not broadcast as shows of wealth, but exercised as quiet instruments of preference and protection. The city recalibrated. Investors recalibrated. The Hale family, once a practiced machine for the theater of success, had to rebuild the scaffolding of public trust. Those who had cheered the couple's earlier ascendance watched now with a curious impatience as reputational currency shifted. Viral memory is not easily erased. The clip lived in the public square, its meaning contested and bent by commentary and editorializing. But the sequence held: one public humiliation, one quiet retreat, one use of power that favored consequence over spectacle. There was a moral lesson that did not need to be spelled out at the end of a story. It was contained in the economy of gestures. The way a napkin offered could become an insult. The way a wine glass could be wielded like a scepter. The way recorded pixels could turn private scorn into public repayment. It was contained in the practice of dignity, which sometimes looks like leaving the room, and in the use of influence, which sometimes looks like refusing to reward dehumanization. Jamal walked more carefully than he had before. Not because he had become timid, but because he had learned, again, how small the world can feel when everyone is watching, and how vast the consequences can be when authority is wielded with clarity. He kept his life free of spectacle, and in that freedom there was an understated echo. Power, unseen, when guided by principle, can correct a wrong without becoming the very thing it condemns. On a late afternoon, with light thinning into bronze, he walked past a small cafe window where two women pointed at a looping clip on a tablet and argued quietly about what justice looked like. He did not stop. He did not look for applause. He only moved forward, steady and unhurried, as if to remind himself and anyone watching that dignity is not performed for an audience. They had dumped food on him, and they had not known who he was. The rest unfolded because he refused to allow humiliation to become costless. In that refusal, there was no triumphalism. There was, instead, a quiet insistence that the world be careful with each other. Walk carefully, he seemed to tell the city, not as threat, but as a necessary counsel in a world that is, in the end, small enough for everyone's actions to return. Follow for more stories where power flips in a moment.